OK, now, before we get to the tax story and we get to Matthew, hello, Ben.
Here we go.
I haven't seen you, though, since you have gracefully, shall we say, parted company. Was it gracefully? With Reform.
Yeah.
And am I right in saying that that's because you felt like it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you felt like that it was not very democratic in its processes?
So I've said a lot publicly about Reform, and I imagine viewers, listeners who are tuning in now, supporters of Reform, won't thank me for going on and on and on about the reasons why I left.
Yeah, but they like free speech as well,
Yeah.
and they don't mind hearing things that they disagree with. They might complain about it, but they'd rather that.
Well, one of the issues I had with Reform before I joined it was the fact that it is a limited liability company with 15 shares. In those days, 8 of them were owned by Nigel Farage, 9 are now owned by him, and that's 60% of the company, and that of course means that no other view in Reform can really cut through to the leadership. And when Richard Tice, who was leader at the time, invited me to join, I said, well, I'll do it if Nigel gives up his majority shareholding. Nigel wasn't prepared to do that, so we had a long discussion. At the end of that, I got a letter from Richard, which, amongst other things, promised the company, the party, would be run on a consensual basis. And that, of course, worked extremely well. Richard and I took Reform from 6% in the polls to 16% just before the general election. We put Reform on the map, and together we were a good team. But, of course, Nigel appointed himself leader on the 3rd of June, and at that point, the letter that Richard gave me didn't work. So the minute Nigel came back as leader, in the background I was saying to Richard and others, including Nigel, we've got to, once this general election ends, we've got to democratise the party, because you can't be a serious political force if you are effectively owned and controlled by one individual, no matter how good that individual is. You must have checks and balances, you need a broader team, a deeper team, etc. And to his credit, Nigel said at the end of the election that he would democratise the party. But, here we are. Where are we now? Nearly into January, and the democratisation...
6 months on from the election. Nearly 6 months on from the election.
6 months on from the election, and despite a draft constitution being produced, despite promises being made that the company would be changed to a company limited by guarantee and then handed over to the members, none of that has happened. No applications have been made to the Electoral Commission, and so... I just got to the point where, when you keep saying you're going to do something and you don't do it, it seems to me you don't really have an intent to do it.
But can I just say, though,
yeah.
And I take exactly what you're saying, but do you think that the people who are attracted to Reform and attracted to Nigel Farage, do you think that they care? I mean, do you think that genuinely, people know this, people know what you've said that has been in the public domain?
Yeah. And
I just wonder whether the fight for what Reform stands for is more important than the checks and balances behind the scenes, because people who love Reform know that this is the case, but they still love Reform.
Yeah, but the reason I loved Reform was because I wanted it to be, still want it to be, a party that is capable of governing the United Kingdom. I don't want it to be a pressure group. One of the other promises I got Richard Tice to make to me was that there would be no deals with the Tories. I wanted it to be an absolutely independent fighting force capable of forming government. Now, if you just want a lot of razzmatazz and you want to make a noise and you want to be a pressure group, frankly, it doesn't matter what the ownership structure is. But if you want to form a government, then you've got to have the checks and balances in place. You've got to get your act together. You can't launch an army into war unless its logistics are completely sorted out behind the scenes. You've got to be able to mount the attack, hold the position, and then govern the land that you take over. And that can only happen if reforms itself.
Okay.
And so for me, it's not a matter of me throwing my toys out of the pram saying, well, I'm not going to do it because I'm not happy with the structure. For me, it's about Reform, please make yourself capable of governing this country.
All right, just one last thing, because I know you want to bring this up, and then we're going to take a break, and then we'll get to Matthew. So tell Matthew that to hang fire. I know that he's chomping at the bit. But also there has been this controversy from Kemi Badenoch regarding these apparent Reform members, and she said that the counter is fake via the back end, and Reform have said that is not the case and that she's completely wrong with that, and they say they have proof of that and that she needs to say that she's sorry. You've been sending me some messages this morning. You also have some cynicism. I don't know whether you agree with Kemi Badenoch, but you have some cynicism about the way in which they're conducting themselves with membership numbers, don't you?
Well, I mean, Kemi was simply wrong, wasn't she? I think she felt that the counter just didn't make sense going up at the rate at which it was going up. And she tweeted, and indeed I said if she's right, you know, I tweeted after her saying, because I thought if Kemi's tweeting that actually the back end of this counter is corrupt, she must have evidence for that.
Yeah, she must know that.
She must know it.
It's a very strange thing to do. But what about what you think about these other...
Yeah, so the thing that really strikes me about the membership of Reform is when you log on to become a member, and anyone can do this, go online now. I ask everyone who's listening to go online now, pay your 10 quid, and you can put in any fictitious address, any fictitious name, false telephone number, and it'll register you as a member. Now, it's very basic software that marries up an address to a postcode. It's very basic software that will text you back to the ostensible telephone number that you put down just to verify that you are at least an individual with that telephone number. None of those checks and balances in the registration process for membership at Reform. So if you take, I'm not suggesting for a moment that Reform has done this, but if you take a deep-pocketed set of individuals and give them the ability to put lots of £10 up, you can make it look like membership is picking up dramatically.
Aren't perhaps those checks and balances on making sure that the people who are joining Reform as part of this big membership surge are real people with real addresses?
I mean, I went on this morning and I registered under a fictitious name, I registered.
Did you get a membership number and all of those things?
And I got back a thing saying, yeah, you're taking your 10 quid, and I got a confirmation email back, which I sent to you.
Now, of course, Reform, I should say, we did contact Reform to get a right of reply from them on this. We've not heard back from them, but certainly when it comes to their membership, they have vociferously denied that there is any kind of impropriety. If what you're saying happened, and I don't doubt that you're telling the truth, of course, they may well say that this was either an anomaly or indeed that they don't know that people can do that, and so it's fair to say that they're not here to defend themselves. But
can I just say one more thing, Cristo? This is a storm in a teacup. It's not about how many members Reform has got and how many members the Tory party has got. What matters is that the membership that they do have is a membership that is capable of being galvanised at the time of an election.
But they have a say, is what you're saying as well, that it's democratic,
that they have
and that they have those sorts of things.
But from the HQ's perspective, a membership that can be galvanised into the ground war during an election.
Right. And if they're not real people...
And if they're not real people,
they can't do
it's
that.
all rubbish, yeah.
Also, Nigel Farage has responded to Kemi Badenoch today, apparently being angry that he has a show on GB News, and he says that Kemi talks about competition being a good thing. Now we see she wants to be taken off air. Maybe her first priority should be to come on GB News and apologise for calling me dishonest, because her 2 days of silence is deafening.